The wind moved across the plains like a whisper from the dead. Dry grass bent in submission as if bowing to something long buried beneath the red earth. A hawk circled high above, its cry slicing the silence. And below it a single man stood. Alone, silent, still, as if carved from the same brittle ground he worked, Wade McAllister knelt at the edge of the fence line, his broad frame hunched over a shallow hole he'd dug beneath a mesquite tree. His beard was graying, coarse, untouched by vanity. Sun-browned skin clung to his cheekbones, and his eyes, once the shade of fresh creek water, were now washed-out ghosts of their former selves. He looked down at the photograph in his hand, edges curled, faces faded but not forgotten, a woman, with a soft smile, and a boy no older than 7, clutching her skirt with both hands. Wade ran his thumb over their faces one last time. Then he placed the photo gently into the earth. "I can't carry it anymore," he murmured, barely audible over the wind. "But I remember." With slow, deliberate motions, he covered it with dirt, patted it down, and stood up without brushing. His knees. As he turned back toward the ranch house, no more than a worn silhouette in the dusk, his voice came like gravel breaking in his throat. "They say the desert will hollow you out, but I was already hollow." He limped back toward the porch, Cooper trotting beside him. The dog was the only soul he talked to, now just a one-eyed mutt with a crooked ear and a quiet loyalty. Together, they returned to the house as the last of the light bled into the horizon. Wade's ranch sat on the edge of nowhere, 10 miles from the nearest trail and even farther from anything resembling mercy. The land was stubborn, brittle. The kind of place that didn't forgive mistakes. And yet Wade had stayed. Not out of hope, but because there was nowhere else to go. Every day followed the same rhythm: chores, feedings, repairs. Their cattle dwindled with each hard winter. The water pump groaned louder each time he drew from it. But Wade never complained, never cursed. His silence was a religion now. At night, he sat on the porch with Cooper at his feet, staring into the darkness with the kind of stillness that only grief can teach. A lantern flickered beside him, casting shadows that danced across the floorboards like old memories. Sometimes, in the dead hours before dawn, he'd hear voices. His wife's laugh echoing in the wind. His boy calling for him from the barn. But they never came closer. Just ghosts playing tricks on a tired man. He hadn't been to town in nearly 2 seasons. The last time, someone had asked about his ghost herd, the dozen or so cattle he still kept. Another had whispered that he'd gone mad out there, living with the dead. Maybe they were right. Maybe that's why he stayed. The sun rose hard the next day, hot and indifferent. Wade limped to the pasture, dragging barbed wire and a rusted hammer. Cooper chased after a rabbit half-heartedly before giving up. In the pen, a young calf lay still, its throat torn, blood drying in the dust. "Damn coyotes," Wade muttered. His breath came in short, angry bursts as he knelt beside the carcass. Flies buzzed thick in the heat. He took his rifle and followed the tracks past the ravine and toward the low ridge. The trail was easy to read, fresh paw prints in soft soil. He found them near an arroyo, lounging under shade, arrogant in there. Hunger. One shot cracked the silence. A second coyote scrambled. Wade fired again, missed. He stepped forward, and a sharp root beneath his boot twisted his leg. Pain flared up his thigh like fire. He went down hard, gasping, for a long moment. He lay there, face in the dirt, sweat running into his eyes. Cooper barked from a distance, but didn't come closer. "God's got a funny way of keeping score," Wade growled. He sat up slowly, wincing, and pressed a rag to the open cut above his knee. Blood soaked through. He tied it off and began the long limp home, dragging the dead coyote behind him. The ranch looked smaller now, more fragile. The fence was falling in places. The barn sagged under its own weight. He tossed the coyote's body into a ditch and poured kerosene over it. Fire took it quickly. Dusk began to settle once more, painting the sky in bruised purples and oranges. Wade sat on the porch, rubbing his knee, watching the world go quiet. That's when Cooper growled. It was low at first, almost a whine. Then sharper ears back, stance rigid. Wade stood up slowly, rifle already in hand. He stepped down from the porch, scanning the horizon, and then he saw them. 10 figures, small against the falling sun, walking, not riding, not armed. Barefoot in some cases, young as they came closer, Wade's grip tightened on the rifle. He could see now they were women, Apache, all of them. Their clothes were worn, dusty from travel. Some clung to each other, one limped slightly. Another carried a woven bag close to her chest. They stopped at the edge of his fence line, silent, unmoving. Cooper barked once. Wade shushed him. The group said nothing. But after a long pause, one of them stepped forward. She looked no older than her early 20s, but her eyes were sharp, carved by hardship. She raised her hand not in threat, but in something gentler. A sign, then in halting, accented English, she said, "We need shelter." "Please." Her voice didn't shake. Wade didn't answer right away. His heart pounded. The air thickened. 10 Apache women, alone. In the middle of hostile territory, no weapons. No men? It made no sense. Nothing about it made sense, but their eyes. They weren't the eyes of raiders or tricksters. They were the eyes of people who had run far and long and had no more running left. Wade's rifle lowered slowly. Cooper stopped barking. He looked at them. Looked back at the land behind them, and then he said, barely louder than the wind, "Get inside the barn." The women moved as one, silent, steady. As they passed, one of them looked back at him and offered the smallest nod of thanks. Wade stood there long after the last of them had entered the barn, staring into the dying light, unsure what had just changed, but knowing something had. The barn creaked softly under the weight of 10 weary bodies in a silence thick enough to press on the walls. Wade sat outside its doors, back against the warped wood, rifle laid across his lap. Cooper slept beside him, tail twitching. Inside, the women moved like shadows, quiet, careful, carrying exhaustion in every gesture. They hadn't spoken much since entering. The leader, if she was one, had only nodded once after Wade waved them in. No questions, no begging. Just survival. Through the cracks in the wood, Wade could hear the rustle of fabric. The women were cleaning themselves, shaking dust from their clothes, combing fingers through tangled hair. A faint hum drifted through the air, low and rhythmic. It wasn't a song he knew, but something about it tugged deep at his memory, a fire crackling in a hearth, a voice singing soft as a lullaby. His wife brushing their son's hair beside the fire. That hum had lived in his house once. Wade shifted his weight and blinked the memory away. He didn't sleep that night, only dozed with one eye open, fingers wrapped tight around the rifle. When dawn broke, pale and cool, he pushed open the barn door to check on them. They were awake already. One was sweeping the barn floor with a bundle of sagebrush tied with leather. Another was using the edge of her shawl to polish the old iron lanterns Wade hadn't touched in years. No one had asked permission. The leader stepped forward. "Nalinie," she said, tapping her chest. Her voice was steady, deliberate. She wasn't asking his name. He stared at her for a beat, then pointed toward his chest. "Wade." She nodded. Later, as Wade limped toward the corral, one of the younger women, no more than 18, approached him with a worn blanket folded under her arm. She pointed to his leg. He shook his head. She pointed again, then knelt in the dirt. Wade sighed and lowered himself onto the stump by the fence post. She unraveled the blanket and revealed a small pouch of herbs, water, a needle, and sinew. She worked in silence. Her fingers moved with certainty, not fear. She didn't ask about the scar down the side of his thigh, nor the bullet graze above his hip. She just cleaned the wound, ground dried leaves between her palms, and pressed the poultice into the raw gash. "Name?" Wade asked gruffly. She glanced up, brushed a strand of hair behind her ear. "Kuna." It was the first time someone had looked him in the eye in years without flinching. By the third day, the fences were mended, not just patched, rebuilt. The troughs were scrubbed, the storage shed reshingled. He hadn't asked for any of it. Wade watched them from a distance. Some worked in pairs, some alone. Nalinie carried herself with quiet authority. She said little but watched everything. Two others, twins, maybe fixed the barn door without a word, communicating only through touch and nods. One girl hung small feathers and woven trinkets on the porch post that afternoon. Wade stood outside the house, drinking from a tin cup, when one of them walked up to him. She was small, maybe 16, with a round face and shy hands. She held out a small tin wrapped in cloth. Inside, 2 misshapen cornmeal cakes. Warm and fragrant. Wade looked at them, then at her. She didn't smile, just waited. He took one, bit into it. Dry, but filling. He nodded once. Her expression didn't change, but her shoulders eased. Then she turned and walked back toward the barn. That night, Wade sat on the porch again, rifle resting beside him, eyes on the black horizon. Nalinie appeared in the doorway, shawl wrapped tight around her shoulders. She sat beside him without asking. They didn't speak for a long time. Then, in a voice almost swallowed by the night, she said, "You lost people." Wade didn't move, just stared into the dark. She continued. "So did we?" He turned to look at her. Her eyes weren't just tired. They were hollowed out. "Camp was near San Miguel," she said. "We were told we'd be safe. We traded with the army, gave them horses, taught them to hunt." They smiled. "Then they came back, burned everything." She pressed her hands into her lap. "They said it was justice. That one of our men attacked a settler. But he hadn't. He was hunting." "Dear," Wade's jaw tightened. He remembered San Miguel. He remembered the smoke rising over the ridge, and the rumors that passed through the saloon in town, rumors wrapped in patriotism and lies. He spat into the dirt. "Justice," he said. "Funny word." She nodded slowly. "We ran 10 of us. Just us, no men left." Cooper barked once, distant. Wade stood. "Stay here," he muttered. He walked out toward the west edge of the ranch, where the land sloped gently down into the arroyo. He scanned the horizon. Nothing but silence, but the next morning, as the sun bled across the plain, one of the girls Kuna pointed out across the hills. Her brow was furrowed. Wade followed her gaze. There, faint but unmistakable, a plume of smoke rising from the ridgeline. Not a campfire, bigger. He saddled his horse and rode hard. Hours later, he returned, dust on his face, eyes dark. He didn't speak as he dismounted. Nalinie met him at the porch. "Well?" she asked. Wade paused. "Looked at the barn? The house?" "The sky." Then he said, simply, "Men in uniforms. Come in this way." He walked past her into the house. A moment later the hammering began. He was boarding up the windows. The days that followed were unlike any Wade McAllister had known in years. The barn, once a place of rotting wood and forgotten tools, now echoed with life-soft laughter, footsteps, the gentle whinny of horses being fed by careful hands. The women had settled into the rhythm of the land without complaint, as though their presence had always been written into the dust. That morning, as the sky burned gold and gray, one of the girls, slight, curious, with her hair tied back by a red thread, stood near the corral, eyeing Wade's mare with silent fascination. "You ever ride?" Wade asked, voice rough with sleep. She shook her head. He clicked his tongue, gestured her forward. "I'll show you." He moved slowly, showing her how to approach the horse, how to speak gently. She didn't flinch when the mare turned its head. Together they tightened the saddle, buckled the cinch. Her hands trembled at first, then steadied. Wade guided her through it, step by step. When she finally climbed up, awkward but determined, he laughed. Just once. It was a short, startled sound, like it had escaped his throat before he realized it was still in there. The girl blinked in surprise, then grinned wide. The others noticed. A few exchanged glances. One smiled. Nalinie, from her post near the firewood pile, allowed the corners of her mouth to soften. By sunset, the barn had changed. Feathers were tied to the beams with thread woven from rabbit sinew and corn husk. Strips of colored fabric now lined the old tool shed like banners. Wade hadn't stopped it, and to his own surprise, he hadn't wanted to. Inside the house, the hearth had been cleaned. A woman named Senna, no more than 20, began painting flowers onto the faded walls with crushed berries and charcoal. Wade passed her once, paused, and said nothing. Just watched. That night, As the air cooled and stars pushed through the dark, Wade sat outside by the fire pit he'd built earlier that afternoon, round, wide, lined with stones from the ridge. From the barn came a soft hum, not a song, but something older, carried by wind and voice. Then faintly the sound of a wooden flute, raw, mournful, distant. Wade didn't ask who was playing. He just leaned back in his chair and let the sound wash over him. He couldn't remember the last time he'd heard music on this land. It was well past midnight when the knock came. Firm, measured, one knock. Then another. Cooper barked sharp from under the porch. Wade was already on his feet. Rifle in hand, he stepped into the darkness, boots crunching dry gravel, eyes scanning. The firelight flickered behind him, standing. Near the edge of the barn's shadow was a man, tall, still. His face was painted with streaks of white and black, his chest bare beneath a long deerskin vest. His eyes didn't move. Neither did his hands, which were raised in a show of peace. Who the hell? Wade didn't lower the rifle. The man stepped forward slowly, then pulled something from his satchel, of folded paper. He held it out. Wade didn't take it, but he looked. A torn U.S. Army map. Hand-drawn lines, circles, roots behind Wade. The barn door creaked open. Nalinie's voice broke the tension. "Tacho." The man looked up. She stepped closer, barefoot, hair unbound, a tremble in her breath. "My brother." Wade lowered the rifle. The fire cracked. Cooper stopped barking. Tacho sat across from Wade as the night deepened. Nalinie crouched beside him, translating where needed. He pointed to the map. His fingers moved with clarity, urgency. "They're not just looking for us," she said, translating. "They know we escaped, but they don't want us back. They want us erased." Wade's jaw clenched. "Why?" Tacho murmured. Nalinie hesitated, then said, "Because we saw what they did. Because we survived." "They were supposed to leave no witnesses." Wade stared into the flames. "They'll find you here," he said. Tacho nodded once. "I can take them through the Spanish trails," he offered, voice low but clear. "They'll be safe, hidden, far from here." Wade shook his head. "This ain't my fight," he muttered. "But I've seen what men in uniforms call justice, and this feels too damn familiar." He stood and looked toward the barn. "I ain't running anymore." Nalinie's eyes searched his. "They'll burn it all." Wade looked around the fire pit, the porch, the soft flicker of painted flowers on the inside wall. "I built this with my own hands. Buried my wife right there under that tree. Buried my boy beside her. No more running, not for me." He reached for his tool belt and slung the rifle over his shoulder. Next morning, Wade sharpened every blade he had, reinforced the front door with extra beams, packed cartridges into boxes and stacked them by the windows. He redug the trench behind the house that had long since filled with weeds. Tacho helped, silent and efficient. The girls worked without complaint. One boiled water. Another stacked firewood behind the house. The youngest two stripped bark from cedar limbs to use as tripwire markers. As the sun fell behind the buttes, Wade lit the lanterns and stood at the edge of the porch. Behind him, 10 women stood shoulder to shoulder. Silent. Unmoving. Strong. He didn't turn to face them, but his voice carried low. "Steady. A man's only as good as what he stands for. And I've stood for too little too long." He chambered around. The rifle clicked with finality. The wind kicked up dust along the edge of the horizon. They were ready. The morning air was thin and sharp, a brittle silence before the inevitable. The land held its breath. The sky, a dull gray before dawn, offered no warmth, only stillness. Wade stood at the porch's edge, hammer in hand, driving the last spike into a makeshift barricade across the front gate. The boards creaked with each blow, echoing like slow drums in the valley. His jaw was tight. Every motion spoke of a man who'd made peace with consequence. Behind him, Tacho moved like a shadow, placing tripwires across the slope from the ridge, and stacking broken glass in a narrow channel where the soldiers might charge. They had marked the terrain by memory: ridge, ravine, trough, tree. It wasn't much, but it was theirs now. The girls watched from the doorway. Wade turned. wiped sweat from his brow, and nodded toward the small trapdoor built into the side of the barn. The root cellar. Get in. Stay low. Don't open it till I knock 3 times. They hesitated, eyes wide, but obeyed one by one, disappearing into the earth like seeds being planted, all except Kuna. She stood near the fire pit, arms crossed, jaw set. Wade approached. You're going with them. She shook her head. Kuna, no. She said firmly, I stay. She turned before he could argue, grabbing a rusted hatchet from the woodpile and marching to the barn's flank. Wade sighed. Then let her be. A distant rumble rose beyond the ridge-low, steady hooves, marching boots. Metal clanging against leather. Wade loaded his rifle slowly. Tacho drew his bow and melted into the shadows behind the broken corral. Then came the dust. It crept over the ridge like a wave of ghost, dozens of figures in blue coats, rifles gleaming. Their commander barked orders. A flag fluttered behind them, stars faded, stripes dulled. They came not to question, not to speak. They came to erase. The first shot cracked the morning open. Wade's rifle bucked against his shoulder. A soldier fell. Chaos followed. Horses screamed. Dirt exploded from the ground. One trooper went down, tangled in a tripwire, his legs snapping at an unnatural angle. Another was thrown from his horse when Tacho's arrow pierced his chest from the dark. Gunfire erupted in all directions loud. Clumsy, panicked, Wade ducked behind a wagon, fired twice, caught a third in the shoulder. He grunted, stumbled back, but stayed on his feet. Tacho moved like a ghost, never in one place for more than a breath. His arrows found targets in the gaps between gunshots. Between panic, a stray shot shattered the barn window. Embers from the morning's fire caught in the hay. Flames climbed the dry wood fast. Inside, Cooper barked wildly. Wade turned toward it, but Kuna was already there, yanking the barn door open despite the heat. Smoke spilled out. Kuna, get back! Wade shouted. She vanished into the haze. Moment later, she emerged, coughing, dragging the dog by the scruff. His leg was bloodied, but he was alive. She fell beside Wade behind the stone trough, chest heaving. He touched her arm. She nodded. The fight raged, then dwindled. Then, silence. Wade stood slowly, rifle trembling in his hand. Smoke curled behind him. Blood dripped from his sleeve. Bodies lay still in the dust, 4 soldiers unmoving. The rest had fled into the hills. Retreating under the weight of failure and confusion, Tacho appeared from behind the ridge. Blood on his arm, but unshaken. Wade's knees buckled. Kuna cried out as he fell, catching him just before his head hit the stone. Inside the house, they laid him down on a cot. Nalinie worked quickly, her hands practiced, stitching the graze across his side. You should have run, she whispered, binding the wound. I've done enough running. He rasped. The girls emerged from the cellar slowly, blinking into the light. The fire in the barn was out now, burned black, but standing. Ash floated gently through the air like snow. One by one, they approached Wade. Kneeling before him, each laid a single feather at his feet. Bright, hand-painted, symbolic. Tacho stepped forward last, nodding once. You are not of them, he said. You are of us now. Wade didn't speak. He just stared at the feathers. He was too tired for pride, but not too tired for truth. The next morning, the sky was clearer than it had been in weeks. The air still held smoke, but the worst had passed. The wagon was packed water, tools, what little food they had. Tacho stood beside it, ready to lead. His sister and the others north, far beyond the reach of soldiers, into forgotten lands where no maps pointed. The girls climbed aboard in silence. There were no goodbyes, just eyes that held what words could not. Nalinie stood beside Wade on the porch. He looked at her, then at the wagon. You sure? He asked. She didn't answer. She didn't move. Tacho glanced back, said nothing. He understood. The wagon rolled out slowly, wheels creaking. Wade stood beside Nalinie as it disappeared over the ridge. Cooper sat beside them, tail thumping gently, one leg wrapped in a cloth strip. Wade glanced at the broken fence, the bloodstains in the dirt, the smoldering edge of the barn. He looked at the horizon, endless and alive. And then he looked at her. She didn't smile, but She stayed. Later, they walked the land together, barefoot, slow, quiet. The sun was high. The wind soft. Wade's voice came like an echo, barely above a whisper. The desert didn't hollow me out. It carved me clean, and somehow, in all that dust, something finally grew. If this story moved you, leave a comment below. What would you have done in Wade's place? Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video with someone who still believes in the strength of honor and redemption.